think of Path of Exile, what is the single biggest mistake that you can think of that they have ever made? If you said 3.19, you are absolutely wrong. If you said any previous league over the last year or so, you are wrong. I'm here to tell you why Harvest League was the single biggest mistake Grinding Gear Games has ever made in the history of Path of Exile, and why. Hi, I'm Michael. I'm the one and only Kaiju Sage. Welcome to a new video. And if you just want the quick answer as to why Harvest was the worst, mistake that GGG has ever made, let's talk about it. The quick answer: it takes up so much design space that it sucks all of the air out of the room. It single-handedly is killing GGG's ability to experiment, and it sets a lot of bad precedents for the future health of the game. And if that's all you were here for, if you just wanted to click on the video and see what it is, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and all that jazz. But if you'd like to hear me explain a little bit more about all this, let's get into it. What do you say? So, first and foremost, it causes or has caused several problems throughout its entire history. It limits design space way too much. It has caused the most controversy, hate, or backlash in total of any league mechanic, period. There is no other league mechanic that I can think of in this game that has had this much just hatred and anger around it and complaining and otherwise. And lastly, it sets several dangerous precedents for the game as a whole. And I'll go into those in a minute. Let's talk about these things one at a time. Let's talk about each of these. First off, design space philosophy. This is a very cool idea. If you've never heard of it, basically, I'll put it in as simple a terms as I can so that you can get an idea of how this represents the harvest problem. Think of Path of Exile as a box. Think of it, whatever empty colored box you want to think of it as. Think of it as just a, 2D box. Put half of that box filled in your mind in this analogy. And that half of the box that is filled in is harvest. Half of this game is, taken up or touched by harvest as a mechanic. Why is that a problem? Well, because half of it is filled up by harvest, taking up so much design space. The entire box, in this case, is the entire game of Path of Exile. With half of it being filled in by harvest, if you put in any mechanic on the other half that is, available design space, you are touching the harvest mechanic. You have to contemplate and consider, how will this interact with harvest in one way or another or another or another. And because half of it is filled in, this is, a bit of an extreme example, but you are literally having to build everything around harvest. Whereas they could have just, in initial implementation, they should have done what Chris Wilson said. Back in, it's so crazy to think about, but it was June of 2020 when Harvest came out. I had to look this up. I looked up the trailer. It was sometime in June of 2020 when Harvest was released. It's been that long. But Chris Wilson, I remember when it was coming out, he said during his Q&A with Ziggy D, I believe, that this was the most risk and player power they've ever given in a league, and they wanted to do it. And he said there is a extremely high likelihood that this will not go core. They should have stuck to their guns on that. They should not have put this in, because as I said, now they have half of their design space box filled in. Could you theoretically redesign the box? Yes. I'm pretty sure in Path of Exile 2, they're going to reshape the box, right? You're going to increase the size of the box, make it wider, make it a rectangle of sorts, make, things a little bit more apart. And they're probably going to remove harvest, but that's tinfoil hat theory. I know nothing about it. So what then are you left with? So, like Harvest as a whole is sucking all the air out of the room. And unless it's removed, they have no creativity. They have no room to innovate and do things that they want to do, like they want to do, because they can't put in another advanced crafting system. They can't put in another high player power, high, what is it they always talk about? Deterministic. They can't put in a high determinism mechanic because Harvest already exists. And if it interacts too well with Harvest, then everything is lost. Then it's a dead league because everything's too easy. But now we're left with, several of the other problems. And because it was implemented, oh man, thinking back over the last couple of years, it's been a wild ride. It has been, as I said, it is the most controversial and hate/backlash generating league mechanic that has ever been re-implemented into the game. Even in its implementation, its initial time through the league was not particularly looked upon fondly. I played like 2 weeks myself of Harvest League and hated it. It was Farmville Simulator. It was not particularly fun. So what else happened, right? So it was put in, a lot of players loved it because they could essentially craft their path of building item. They could make anything happen. Initially in Harvest, you could make anything happen with enough time and dedication. And then it went away for a few leagues. And then it was re-implemented in the more modern style of Harvest that we had last league and before, where you would go to the Grove, click the things, kill the things, and just get random crafting recipes offered to you. But that was problematic because it still had a similar level of power. You could still, with enough time and effort and dedication, you could make any item any way you wanted it, pretty much, without with some steps involved. That's problematic for the game because, again, think about how much design space that fills up. In that implementation, it was like 3/4 of the design space. I'm calling it half the design space right now, and that might have dropped down some because of all the nerfs that it received in 3.19. But that's a good thing for the future health of the game. And I'll talk about why when I talk about the third problem I mentioned in the several dangerous precedents that it was set, or that it had set. But think about like every single league. We had Harvest is too strong. Harvest is too strong. Harvest is too weak. Harvest is too strong. Harvest is too strong. Harvest is too weak. So the cycle continued until we get to this league, 3.19, where it's now not necessarily dead, but nobody particularly wants to do it. It's just they're still doing it to get the best option. And that's the thing, right? It takes up so much room. GGG can't replace it now. People have crutched on Harvest for so long that they cannot do anything else. Harvest League is sucking every bit of air out of the crafting league mechanic idea. If they would just remove Harvest or had never implemented it in the first place, they could put in a new mechanic that could be better and could take the ideas of Harvest and then improve upon them. That is what I would like to see happen. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about why it is the problem, why it is such a massive mistake. So, with all of that in mind, that it is, it's limiting design space, it caused so much controversy and backlash towards GGG, and that now it's basically a dead league. What is the dangerous precedence that I'm talking about? Well, initially, as I said, in the, I don't even remember what patch Harvest was. It was Like I said, in June of 2020, 2.5 almost years ago, or 2 years ago, Chris Wilson said the phrase, this is paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact quote, that Harvest was most likely not going to go core. It was the most player power they had ever given in a single league. And they were afraid of that. That is a good thing. I like it when GGG says things like, we are very afraid of how much player power we are giving them in this league. They have not had to say that since Harvest. Why is that? Because after Harvest League, they were more or less traumatized. They were bullied into putting Harvest back into the game in way too strong a state to keep the players happy, and now the players are mad because they're trying to take it away from them. Whereas if they would have just stuck to their guns and said, we are never putting this back in the game. The dangerous precedent is they're not allowed crazy risk or crazy innovation unless the players are happy with it. Unless the players want it to go core and then they demand that it go core. This is the problem. I think GGG needs to go back to a state where they are willing to say, okay, we are going to do something crazy and wild and outlandish and unheard of to you all before in the Path of Exile landscape, but we're only leaving it in for this league. Play during this league if you want it and experience it now because it's never coming back. It's that strong. It's that crazy. It's that wild of a mechanic, but we're never putting it back in the game because it will be too strong. It'll be too much to balance, too much to deal with. And then players can, look back on it fondly, or they can have temporary league mechanics. And, players can argue, oh, but what if what if somebody starts the game 2 years from now and wants to do it? Like, I think that is unfortunate, but I think we are limiting GGG so much by every league has to go core. The idea that every league has to go core started in Harvest, more or less. Like, it didn't necessarily begin, but the actual every league must go core really ramped up when Harvest went core and needed to go core in order to sate the player base. The last precedent that it really solidified and we saw come to a head in 3.19 is that when players are mad about losing something or gaining something or just any change, if they are mad about it and they scream loud enough at GGG, they have to listen to them. And obviously they are somewhat at the whim of their customer. So to some degree they have to. This will always be a thing. But we solidified it with Harvest. Harvest as a whole made it so that GGG got bullied into listening. They had to implement it back into the game because so many people were like, oh, I want Harvest back. I want Harvest back. And then they just cried and cried and cried and cried until GGG put it in a few leagues later. And it has been the thorn in their side ever since. You can tell by how often they've had to nerf it, by how often they've had to balance around it. They've never had another crafting league like Harvest ever since then. And I don't think while Harvest exists, they will ever be able to design a way around it that won't potentially ruin the balance of the game. My personal opinion, and the last thing that I will leave this video with in closing, I personally would love to see the removal of Harvest and the making a way of room for something better, something new. A deletion of Harvest in order to allow GGG the innovation, clear the design space so that they can make something great happen again in Path of Exile. Clear these precedents, clear the hate and backlash of Harvest League, and the just tainted history of it all, and leave GGG a clean slate with which to design upon. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate everybody being here. Thank you for taking your time. If you're new here, please leave a like and subscribe. And I'd love to hear your comments down below. What are your thoughts on Harvest? What do you think they should do about Harvest in one form or another? Are you in the camp of buff it, nerf it into the ground, remove it like I am? Or, as I said, are you in the buff it camp? Do you want them to just make Harvest fully overpowered, which I don't know. I don't think that's great for the game, but hey, let me know down below. I'd love to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.